Hello and welcome to Greenbytes Wednesdays. Greenbytes Wednesdays is a podcast series where we facilitate critical conversations and steer consciousness when it comes to understanding the impact of our digital footprint across Nigeria's technology ecosystem. We hope that with this advanced knowledge, we can introduce you to some tools, trends, and best practices that can enhance your knowledge about digital sustainability. Are you curious about climate change? Are you a tech enthusiast or a climate entrepreneur? Come on board and learn on this episode as we get on with every conversation of the Greenbytes Wednesday podcast series. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Area I under the Scale Initiative, funded by the UK government through the Digital Access Program. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote and I am glad to be your host. Welcome on board. On a previous episode, I talked about how the average individual spend around 6 hours, 40 minutes on their telephone and what that means for the climate. But away from that, what do we do when we are on our phones, on our screens? And sometimes it's, spending time on YouTube as you're probably watching this podcast or watching movies on any of the streaming platforms. But do we think about the impact of this on the environment? Do we think about where all of this data go? Think about pictures and videos and everything you enjoy when you scroll through the gram. Do you know that all of this has huge impacts on the environment? Welcome. We'll discuss more about this, but I just want to say thank you for making out the time and for being part of this conversation today. This is Greenbytes Wednesday. It's a project under the SCALE program. And SCALE here means Smart Climate Awareness Learning and Empowerment Program. And I'm very excited to moderate this conversation. Greenbytes Wednesdays, it's basically facilitating critical conversations and reflecting some consciousness when it comes to the impact of our digital footprints within the Nigerian technological ecosystem. And the aim at the end of the day is to see that these conversations can advance your own knowledge in terms of tools, trend, and facilities when it comes to digital sustainability. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote. I am your host, your guide, and I want to say welcome. So, I gave a background about what we're discussing today, and the topic today is decarbonizing the digital ecosystem. My guest is Jennifer Anya. Jennifer, welcome. Good to have you on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. So Jennifer works around off-grid energy. She works around financial instruments when it comes to renewable energy and some technical operations. And probably that's something that many of us don't know in terms of what exactly operates behind the scene. I was speaking with a colleague and she told me that if you spend 2 hours watching a Netflix movie, for example, it takes approximately the same carbon emission if you're driving around with a fossil fuel car for 45 minutes. And that tells you that there is an unseen part of data, there is an unseen part of our digital ecosystem, and that's in terms of the energy consumption, the water consumption, and all of this environmental impact or climate impact, if you will, that we really do not pay attention to. And the aim of today's conversation is to put the spotlight on that. And I'm really pleased to have Jennifer with me. Jennifer, how would you like to introduce yourself?
I would say I'm human first. Essentially, I am an energy economist. I work in the renewable energy space of grid, particularly pretty much a little bit, maybe say 5, 6, 7 years experience in the sector. And that has sort of correlated from managing solar home systems to then managing commercial and industrial systems to then managing mini grids, which is essentially mini small grids, like what with national grid, but on a smaller scale for rural communities. And then I took a sabbatical from that to then work with development partners to sort of understand what goes behind the scenes in essentially like funding most of the mini grid developers that we see in the market today. So essentially, Energy, renewable energy is what I have done thus far, and I think it's quite rewarding because I think it's one of those things that you turn up the switch or you literally snap your fingers, and once your connections are done right, you see the you see the smiles and you see the warmth on the faces of the people that you're giving it to, you're bringing it to. It sort of reminds you of the reason why you're here in the first place. And I think I'm blessed to be part of that market at the moment. So yeah, pretty easy,
Yeah,
I guess.
great, great. And it's really quite exciting to see that as a young person you've done so much in a short while. And I feel quite what's the word? I'm honored to have this conversation with you. So let's start with let's talk about energy consumption. That's the space in which you work with. What will you say are the key drivers in terms of energy consumption in Nigeria today?
Um, I'd say economic development really, because for example, nothing really happens if there is literally no power. For example, you probably won't get out of bed in the morning if power hasn't come to like 12 noon. You probably will still drag your feet a little bit. But the moment you hear that siren that people probably have in their houses, you realize that okay, your to-do list starts to pop up in your brain, something like that. So in the grand scheme of things, in the Nigeria focus in terms of the large scale, I would say essentially economic like activities. For example, I always like to use my own personal experiences of what has always happened. For example, you would go into a rural community that probably hasn't had power in literally all their lives, right? And then you literally put a mini grid system there, or you give them just a fan, or you give them like a solar home system there. And then the next thing, the person that probably hasn't had power is thinking of how to buy themselves a fridge to make more money. And I don't want to go into like a very, very big conversation about it, but I like to look at it from the perspective of even rural urban migration. Like the reason why I'm literally not from Abuja, I have moved down here is because, oh, this is where the economic activities are. So I would say energy consumption sort of is one of the things that sort of drives everything, be it ICT, data, the MTNs that we know today, the Dangote cement that we know today, the Transcorp, whatever it is, literally,
Good.
energy drives it.
Absolutely. And now you make the preliminary connection between economy, which you say is the main reasons behind energy consumption, and you make this connection between economy and data, where you talked about
Mm.
ICT. I was reading the stats, and it's believed that the ICT sector alone is responsible for about 4% of the global greenhouse gases emission, and that's quite huge if you look at um, for a sector that we really do not pay attention to when we talk about carbon emissions. And in these days of AI and ChatGPT and TikTok, there's a lot of data centers across the world. There's a lot of cloud services across the world, and it's believed that they also consume a significant amount of the world's energy consumption. So the point I try to make there is that when we talk about economy as the reasons for more energy consumption, we cannot sort of separate the role of technology in that. So if you could make it, like I said, you made the preliminary introduction, but if you could make it more, obvious, how would you say that the advancement in the tech space is also sort of tapping on or demanding when it comes to energy?
I like to look at it from the perspective of what we even see around us today. Nigeria is currently about a 200 million population, right? And I dare say that if you go to MTN today to demand for your data from 10 years ago, you will get it. Because I do believe that they should have that information because this is kind of information that they keep. Right. So take this larger to the economy or to the world itself. Places like even like the UK conservatory, or I mean all of these bigger like organizations and even like bigger European countries or even the US themselves, right? You realize that they can always go back to information and to peel things out. Right. So all of that information is just not lying there. It's saved up somewhere in the cloud. And to be able to run some of these facilities, you need energy to keep them running because you cannot you can't tap on a dead phone and expect it to work. So the same way applies to this as well. So you literally have to have data centers that are up and running every single day. So that then means that power needs to be channeled into those areas. And bringing it back to context of where we currently live in Nigeria today, where we almost can't assure ourselves of about maybe say 15 hours of power like every single day. That then means that there then is a case for the use of a generator, right? In most cases, you off-grid power or rather a renewable energy source is not available for that. So that then means that of course there is some offshoot of that in terms of course we as the world is going today, there's climate change that's happening where we even see today what the weather is currently looking like. As at last week, I heard rain fell in October, which is very, very. My grandmother would never ever believe that. So that is some of the things that we're seeing today, and it's not just because, but it's not just because we are not just doing anything, but we realize that okay, some of the things that we're doing today, the advent or the offshoot of all of the data that we're churning, all of the activities that we're doing, is essentially causing the world to literally start to then rebel against us and say, okay, I need to take a pause on this. So in that light, I would say that it's sort of like there's a it's like a cause and effect. Like the more you do something, the more the effect starts to pop up.
Interesting. What's the role of policies now in strengthening? You've made it clear we cannot look away from the fact that the energy or our data lifestyle, digital lifestyle is very much dependent on energy. You also talked about you made this comparison. Maybe before we get into policy, this is something interesting. Tell me, you talked about how an average guy in Nigeria, for example, will maybe have 15 hours of power in a day. And if we put this side by side with places in Europe, for example, where for the next 24 months, not hours, for the next 24 months, they are guaranteed that the light will not blink for a second. What's the role of this divide, this development divide, and how do we connect it with our data dependency? So let me put it clearly. If we add more hours if we have electricity for more period of time, then it means we would use a lot more in terms of data storage compared to if we have less. You don't seem to agree.
That's a conversation we are going into. So I'll let you land first.
Yeah. No. That's is just like simple mathematics. If I have 24 hours of electricity access, then it means I can do a lot more on the internet compared to if I have just 2 hours and then there's limited time for me to spend on the internet.
Yeah.
So how does this reflect in terms of and by our, if you look at the developed country and you compare with the developing countries or least developed countries, how does energy access impact on data sustainability?
So I would take us back to the conversation or what I said earlier on in the beginning, where I said that where I sort of mirrored what we currently have existing here and then in developed countries as well. So for us, just even looking at the data, I think I was reading the UK Parliament post, and you did mention that. I think you had mentioned that earlier in the morning, earlier when we had the conversation, that about roughly between 5 to 10% of like energy consumption was used between like 2020 and it was quite interesting, like in the world, literally. So bringing that then down to where we currently are today, and this is not me saying that. I'm not trying to like put a divide as you had earlier mentioned, because at the end of the day, like all of the statistics that come out is grouping it all as one, right? Even the IEA, International Energy Agency, they had mentioned that about 2 terawatt hour of energy of energy was consumed literally like in ICT. I think this was in 2020 as well. So for me, it's quite interesting to start to then pull all of that information together, because you realize that what you said is true. More energy, more work. It's like if we have more than 24 hours in a day, you literally will be able to achieve a lot more stuff than what you're able to do in 24 hours. So if you give an average person more power to do, more electricity rather, to do the kind of work that they currently do, they'll be able to actually churn out a lot more work. But I would say that this is really trying to like negate what you said earlier on, in the sense that We'll be able to do more, yes, but of course we still have the same hours in the day. But then those that already use generators, maybe we continue to use a generator, but just that the cost might likely reduce. For example, the hotels we have in Abuja or we have existing, they literally run all through the day or 24/7, however long
Yeah.
that is. They still need to use power, regardless of if power is 24 hours or not.
Yeah.
It has to come on.
I see.
So what essentially happens on their own part is that the cost is being reduced for them. Hence why I sort of looked at you that way when you essentially said, well, of course, it doesn't essentially apply to everybody. This is just like a very small focus group at the moment we were looking about that. So
Yeah.
in the long run, yes, it would apply to majority, but not every single person in terms of like if you have more access to power. But in general, the Nigerian economy is not exactly very heavy into the hospitality market. So maybe that could even be maybe less than 2% really. But at the end of it, like the industrials, I guess, will be able to do a lot more and even reduce costs, which is I think is one of the most important things people are looking for in the country at the moment.
I never thought of it that way before, because and thanks for sort of opening me up and also the listener up to this insight. The fact that we have lesser sort of hours from the grid means we have to rely on
Yeah.
other forms or sources of energy, and in most cases these are not as clean, and that means there is more impact on the environment. And I wanted us to talk about policy, but before policy, let's talk about the innovations that are in place to see that we can have let's talk about innovations that are in place to see that we can have sort of cleaner alternatives when it comes to our energy dependency, because whether we like it or not, we need this energy to sort of live on our digital lives. So, and this is probably a field that you work in. So what are some of these innovations that are in place, and how are they helping us to sort of have lesser impacts on the environment while still keeping up with the digital life?
Yeah, I mean, top of the chart for me is renewable energy for me, right?
And
I mean,
by renewable energy, what do you mean? There's
so
solar, there is
say that
wind.
uh, I mean, it will be peculiar to the country that would want to deploy whatever source is. I mean, in Nigeria today, we are heavy on solar because Nigeria is blessed to be a tropical country. So there's a lot more ample supply from the sun. So it's best that you channel that. In countries where we have hydro, where they are very blessed on hydro, they can, of course, rely on that. Um, Wind as well, they can also, I mean, there was the recent inauguration for the Wind Council in Nigeria as well. So which is something that's also starting to firm up on that side. South Africa is doing wind, I think, and I mean some other countries as well. But in terms of innovation, I mean, I always like to bring things back to my own perspective of how I've seen things work. So I remember when I used to work or when I was working with some of these like mini grid companies,
Yeah.
that was when I started to realize, okay, taking us back a little bit in terms of context. I don't know if we sort of go past and we see houses where it's almost ring fenced. And then you see a very high mast, and there's always a generator in there that never ever goes off. It's always churning,
Yeah.
literally, because that sensor has to literally be on because work has to move. Right, but the interesting thing for me is I've come to realize that, okay, how about if you see them in the cities, but then imagine you going back home for a holiday, or you having to retire back to like your family home or your country home somewhere. You realize you still have like internet access. You realize you still have like mobile connectivity, and you wonder how that works. It means that mass you see in your house or in your city, there's also a mass in the village or in the country home or wherever that is, and that means that part also has to come on. So the generator that runs in the city also runs in those areas, right? So what I have seen what I have seen work is most of these areas now are starting to then have like agreements with, say, renewable energy companies in the local vicinities to say, okay, hi guy, okay, how about we partner up together, let's form like some form of anchor load where you have your mini grid existing in one part, and then you can also then come and then get power from here, knocks up your generator totally off use, which essentially then sort of cleans out the whole thing, because there's something about going into a village or a community where is diesel stench. Like the smell that comes out of you think you're breathing new fresh air. It's not fresh. Like it's diesel stench, and then go back like 3 months later when there's like a mini grid there and it's just fresh air. Like it's something it's something marvelous to behold. So like in that's like one aspect of it. Then the thing I've come to realize with data centers, because even when I move around in cities, even like Abuja here, that where I reside in, you would always, once you go past these areas, you always realize that there's always an AC on every single time. And you go past, if you're so close, if you're lucky enough to go close to them, on the outside it's very hot because like the AC, like outdoor unit is showing like a lot more work. So in my head, I'm like, okay, how about like, is there a way to like there's a sequestration, there's like a waste and waste the heat to be, yeah, like you can figure out a way to like conserve that, and then even cooling as well. I'm not exactly sure what all of these are,
Yeah.
but I dare say that there definitely is, or there are definitely innovative methods around that to even, essentially even just make sure that, I mean, as far back as 10 years, we never really knew anything as called inverter VACs, but today there is something like that. So I dare say that like innovations are coming up, waste the heat, cooling. I mean, in most areas right now, you don't even need to use your ACs anymore. There's a fan where you get to put in like like ice in there, and it just churns out for you, and the air that comes out of the fan is just pretty cool. So I think those are some of the things that's in terms of innovation that sort of does the work. Yeah.
Interesting. I'd love to see the fan with the ice, but I know the ice has to be formed from a fridge or a freezer, and that's also energy consuming. But I just wanted to add two other innovations listening to you. It's one is around, you talked about this mast, and I grew up in a place where we had one right by our side, not
Yeah.
a few houses away from my parents' block. But I've also lived outside the country and traveled a lot, and I haven't seen any mast, and I've asked questions about it. And I know there are innovations around satellites that are,
Yeah.
not taking these conventional forms. The second point around innovation I wanted to speak about is around battery storage. Now there's a lot of ideas or innovations around lithium and using some other rare earth metal minerals to keep batteries. So this is completely different and more efficient to like the lead system or the lead battery storage that we've had in the past. Interesting. Thank you very much, Jennifer. We've been talking about, or the topic of the conversation has been decarbonizing the digital ecosystem, and we've been sort of making that nexus between technology, sustainability, and environment, or if you like, say digital technology and then sustainability. And this is where we sort of delve into policy. Personally, I used to work outside of the policy space until I saw how powerful policies are. And I think it is same in every sector regardless. And so maybe as just to set the pace, will you say, Jennifer, that there are some policy frameworks that are in place to help us pay more attention to our data storage, our digital dependencies on the environment?
I mean, yes, I would say that thanks to the Paris Agreement on Climate Change Act, and how there's like a push for the world to be a lot more cleaner. And now there's something called the carbon pricing. It's like a market mechanism of some sort that sort of enables or gears like developing countries and even developed world, as it may be, to be a lot more cleaner in their thought or in their process towards activities that they do essentially. So I would say cap and trade, for example, by cap and trade, I mean, so there is essentially with the carbon pricing.
Yeah.
So like you buy carbon, and the moment you're like, let's break it down. Right. So with carbon pricing, essentially what happens there is with the carbon market. So carbon is then like carbon offsets are sold to companies, right? Essentially you buy them and you're able to trade them. For example, there is a company A and there's a company B. Both of them have then bought carbon credit, right? Essentially, if you're not able to use up your carbon credit and company B has used up theirs, so essentially they're then supposed to then they can then buy from you, but if both of you have used up yours, essentially what that means that so the cap and trade carbon pricing, what it does it is essentially sort of it helps countries or it helps companies to be able to put a cap on their carbon emissions. So if you do more than what your cap is, you pay for it, you're fined for it essentially. So that way there is a controlled way of having to develop yourself or to develop your own company or to develop or what about your activities in terms of whatever economic activity that you're doing in that light.
Yeah.
And I would say even energy efficiency really, I think the UK government have done a very good job in terms of data centers and what they've rolled out. I think there is some form of association where you get to join and then you pay certain fines if you don't meet certain quotas of some sort. I'm not exactly sure what the orders are, but I do know that what tops the list for me is the carbon pricing market in terms of carpentry and what it does. And then, of course, the energy efficiency mandate and, of course, the renewable energy mandate. I think the UK government has said that it wants to decarbonize its grid by 2035, which, in my opinion, from what the report has said, will greatly reduce emissions by 50%. So you can imagine what that would mean for the group, for the European countries, and even taking it even way further than even what the UK government will be doing in that light. So I think that as long as the policies are upheld, I would say, and fines are being sanctioned and put in place, because there's reports that say there's just a whole lot of conversation around carbon trade and carbon pricing. Like, if you go into, I don't think it probably would end this conversation, but yeah, in the grand scheme of things, the carbon market is doing a very good job in trying to make sure that it's putting a cap on the emissions that even companies that sort of are in this market in terms of ICT infrastructure are reducing their footprints.
Absolutely. And I think it's very possible, because if we have transport sector, if we have agri sector that are working very hard to see that they can decarbonize, whatever that means, but to see that they can reduce or manage the carbon emissions from their sector, then it's possible that even for the tech sector, ICT sector, that it is very possible. You talked about mini grid, you talked about off grid, and the potentials that this the average guy wants to be reminded, you posted this 10 years ago, or this person made this post and tagged you 5 years ago. And for that to happen, it means that they have to rely on some sort of energy, carbon. It means they also have to rely on some sort of water to keep the cooling system in all of these data centers. And these are things you probably haven't thought about. And that's why that's the importance of this conversation. Greenbytes Wednesday. And like I said, Greenbytes Wednesday is about these critical conversations that stirs up the consciousness within you, that opens you up to things you haven't thought about, especially when it comes to digital footprints here in Nigeria, but also looking at outside of Nigeria, what are best practices that are happening in other parts of the world? What can we learn from as we advance the tools and the trends in digital sustainability? Let me come back to you, Jennifer Anya. Do you think that there might be some barriers to helping us? Like I said, I think it's really possible with more adoption of, renewables, off-grid, with more innovative systems in tried and perfected. But what are some barriers that you think we have to cross, some hurdles that you think we have to cross to get to that point where we can say, yes, the digital sector has been decarbonized?
Bringing it down to home, I would say, first of all, infrastructure.
Yeah.
Infrastructure in terms of power availability, because if there is power, I dare say that our footprints will greatly reduce compared to, because we're thinking of two things. There's footprint from generators and gasoline that's been run, and there's also the footprint from the data centers themselves. So if we knock off one, that's like having just one fish to then figure out how to catch, right? So infrastructure is one bit of it. I would also say that the data centers itself, right? Logistics on having to move things around, because I dare say that it's like a supply problem. Because imagine you having to figure out what's happening in as far back in Lagos to Ijigawa, like having to process all the data just right at the same time. I think that's like another very big challenge on that sort. So heavily, majorly on infrastructure, if you ask me. So every other thing kind of just sums up to it.
Interesting. And it's been 30 minutes thereabout of this conversation. Thanks for sticking through. Jennifer, what would you say is one thing that you want the listener to keep with them even long after they've listened or watched this?
For me, the most important thing is to realize that I think we all have it. Like, let's not isolate ourselves from the problem, really. We think, it's ICT, yes. I have a phone, you have a phone. I have pictures I've saved up on my phone as far back as how many years ago. And I go back and you'll still find those things there, right? So, and it's not just dealing on it on that phone, but it's having to play your own part as little as you can, sort of like declutter your spaces, figure out ways to spread the word, really. I mean, not everybody really understands the importance of clean energy, really, and what it does. Because back to what I earlier said with the mast and having to say run with generator like 24/7, 365 days a week, and then you put in a generator or put in a cleaner system there or a cleaner source of power there, and just in the transformative like impact that it brings to the community. I think that those are some of the things when you look at that, you start to realize how important it is for you to pay attention to your environment, right? So I think it starts from you and I. For me particularly, then maybe say let's start turning it around to all of ourselves and be a lot more data conscious. It's that thing with ditch the phones, read the book. I mean, it's difficult to say, but I think we can, because all the information that we keep poking into the phone, you go back like, you go to your browser history and find information from like 2 weeks ago. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
That information feeds back to the Microsoft office, from here all the way down there. So you can imagine multiplication of 200 million in Nigeria and then taking out to like the billions in the world. That's like a lot of work. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's declutter our space.
Ditch the phone.
Yeah.
Spend more time with books in nature out there. Interesting. Great advice. I'll keep that to mind. And I also have to declutter a lot. I know I have a lot of data that I don't need and are just hanging somewhere. Thanks for that advice, Jennifer. My guest has been Jennifer Anya, and we've been discussing around decarbonizing the digital space, decarbonizing the digital ecosystem. And it's been quite a lot. For me, I've learned a lot from her, and I hope that you've learned also from this conversation. It's been Greenbytes Wednesdays, where we have a singular aim to see that we can facilitate such critical conversations and stir up some consciousness when it comes to the digital space. And we're very excited that we can do this thanks to the support from the FCDO, the UK government, for making this possible. This is where I also say thank you very much to the team, Ayo, Ajibola, wonderful, Prince Gideon, and everyone that has made this possible. Big thanks also to our hosts that have provided us with this very lovely facility, Dinovate Studios. We're very excited. And this is just one of many episodes. Feel free to check out previous episodes of the Greenbytes Wednesdays. We have lots more coming up. Feel free to keep your tabs on our social media and those, and read up more about our projects, our program, the Scale for Net Zero program. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote, and it's been a pleasure hosting this. Till the next time, keep doing the best you can to make the world a better place. Bye for now. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Greenbytes Wednesday. This podcast is brought to you by Area I under the Scale Initiative, thanks to funding from the UK government through the Digital Access Program. Have you learned something new? Please share with your network, share with your friends, as I look forward to hosting you on yet another episode of Greenbytes Wednesday next week. Follow us on our social media platforms, check out our courses, test yourself, see how much you know, how much you're learning when it comes to digital and sustainability ecosystem in Nigeria. And I should remind you that as you balance your knowledge of digital ecosystem, also remember to stay committed to a shared and sustainable planet. My name is Seyifunmi Adebote. Bye for now.